Once upon a time, in a quiet town nestled in the heart of Idoma land, lived a man named Ojiji. Ojiji was a large, fearsome man whose very name struck fear into the hearts of those who heard it. His shoulders were broad and his voice thundered like a storm. He was known far and wide, not for any act of bravery or kindness, but for his cruelty and his grip over his household. Ojiji's wife, Ona, had once been a joyful woman with a smile as bright as the morning sun. She came from a respectable family and dreamt of a life filled with love and laughter. But those dreams had long been shattered by the relentless wickedness of her husband. Over the years, Ojiji had beaten her spirit into the dust, and now she was a mere shadow of her former self, broken and cowed into submission. She walked with her head bowed, her eyes dull, avoiding any confrontation that might invite another round of Ojiji's unreasonableness. She had learned long ago that her silence was the only thing that could keep her going. They had 2 children, Adama, their daughter, and EJEMBI, their son. Adama was a girl of 21 years old, her eyes wide and her spirit still unbroken, though she had begun to sense the weight of the negativity that permeated their home. Her skin was the color of rich earth, her eyes always searching for an escape, a moment of peace. Her laughter had become a rare thing, something only the birds and the wind remembered. But when it came, it was like music, a fleeting reminder of the child she once was. Her brother EJEMBI was 18, a tall, strong boy. He had inherited his father's build, but not his wicked ways. He had seen too much, felt too much, and the need to address his father's unreasonableness within him had begun to grow like wildfire. EJEMBI disliked his father with a passion that burned inside like hot coal. He watched Ojiji, his father, with eyes full of dislike, dreaming of the day he would be strong enough to end their suffering. Every evening, Ojiji, their father, would stagger home, drunk on palm wine, his breath reeking, his eyes bloodshot. He would yell and insult Ona, his wife. He would then turn his attention to Adama. The young lady had learned to keep her head down, her eyes to the floor, but even this did not protect her from Ejiji's depravity. When Adama turned 22, her body began to change, her belly swelled, and she was often sick. At first, Ona hoped it was some illness, some passing ailment that would soon fade. But as the months wore on, the truth became undeniable. Adama was pregnant. But who was the father? The revelation shattered Ona, her mother. She could not understand how life had become this nightmare. She prayed to the gods to intervene, to save her daughter, but her prayers were met with silence. Adama gave birth to a boy, a small, fragile thing, with bright eyes that seemed too innocent. Ona looked at the child with a mix of love and pain. She loved the boy because he was her grandson, a part of her daughter, but she also resented the fact that her husband fathered the child. Ojiji, her husband, on the other hand, seemed unfazed. He continued his nightly rampages, drinking even more heavily now. His laughter loud and boisterous, as if mocking the very heavens. He named the boy Ikani, a name that meant strength, as if to lay claim to the child's existence as a testament of his own power. Adama looked at her son with love, also with confusion. Was Ikani her brother or her son? Was he her father's child, her own child, or both? The questions tormented her as she rocked the baby to sleep each night. His soft breath against her neck, the only comfort in her nightmarish existence. Years passed and Ojiji's behavior worsened. His body, once strong and formidable, began to show signs of his excesses and age. His belly grew round, his breath labored, and his steps faltered. Yet his unpleasant ways did not wane. It seemed as if the gods themselves were afraid to punish him. But the gods were patient, and they had plans for Ojiji. One stormy night, EJEMBI, his elder son, could no longer contain the fury that had been building inside him for years. He had grown into a strong young man, his muscles taut, his fist hard. He had watched his mother assaulted by his father. his sister and himself mistreated, and his own spirit crushed under the weight of his father's misbehavior. He decided that enough was enough. That night, Ojiji came home as usual, drunk and aggressive. He staggered through the door, shouting for his wife. EJEMBI stood up and said, "Leave her alone." EJEMBI's voice was low, steady, filled with a calm that frightened even Ojiji. Ojiji laughed, a deep, ugly sound that echoed through the house. "What did you say, boy?" He sneered, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "I said, leave her alone," EJEMBI repeated, stepping closer. His fists were clenched, his muscles taut, ready for the confrontation he had been dreaming of for years. Ojiji's face twisted in a cruel smile. "You think you can challenge me, boy? I'm your father. I'm the man of this house." "Man? You are no man," EJEMBI said softly, his voice filled with the calm of the storm before it breaks. "You are nothing." With a roar, Ojiji launched at his son, his hands outstretched, ready to throttle the life out of him. But EJEMBI was ready. He sidestepped his father's attack and, with a swift movement, brought his fist down on Ojiji's back with all the strength he could muster. Ojiji staggered, his legs buckling beneath him. He tried to rise, but EJEMBI kicked him hard in the knees, sending him crashing to the floor. Ona screamed, her hands flying to her mouth. Adama stood frozen, her eyes wide, her heart pounding. Ikani, now 3 years old, cried out in fear, his small body trembling. Ojiji tried to crawl, his hands scrabbling at the dirt floor, but EJEMBI was relentless. EJEMBI howled, his voice rising above the storm outside. EJEMBI stood over him, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing like a fire that had been ignited long ago. "You will never touch them again," EJEMBI said, his voice low and dangerous. "If you ever lay a hand on them again, I will deal harder with you." Ojiji lay on the ground, writhing in pain. The power he once wielded over his family was broken, shattered like his leg. And for the first time in his life, he felt fear, real, cold, and paralyzing fear. The people of the town, drawn by the noise, gathered outside the hut, whispering among themselves, eyes wide with shock. They had always known Ojiji was a tyrant, but they had never imagined he would face such a reckoning. Inside the house, Ona knelt beside her husband, her hands trembling as she reached out to him. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she drew back, her eyes filled with tears. She looked at EJEMBI, her son, her protector, and a strange feeling began to stir within her, a feeling she had never felt in years, a feeling of hope. Adama, still holding Ikani, took a step forward, her eyes on her brother. "What just happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. EJEMBI looked at her, his expression softening. "Now we decide our fate," he said. "Now we are free." But freedom, they will soon learn, came with its own burdens. The people of the town, now emboldened by Ojiji's fall, began to murmur amongst themselves. What should be done with him? Could a man so broken never truly repent? The storm outside raged on, its thunder and lightning reflecting the turmoil inside Ojiji's household. The villagers still gathered outside, whispering amongst themselves, their faces a mix of shock, fear, and perhaps a hint of satisfaction. Ojiji, once a fearful man, lay on the ground, broken in both body and spirit. For years, he had ruled with an iron fist, instilling fear in all who crossed his path. But now, in his moment of weakness, he was but a pitiful shadow of his former self. Inside, the family stood in tense silence. Ona watched her son with eyes full of conflicting emotions. She saw the strength in EJEMBI, the son who had dared to stand against his father. For years, she had prayed for deliverance, and now that it had come, she did not know how to feel. She glanced at her daughter, Adama, who held little Ikani close to her chest, shielding him as if her life depended on it. The boy, too young to understand the chaos around him, had stopped crying, his wide eyes looking at his grandfather or father on the floor. Take my father to the back, EJEMBI finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, commanding. He cannot stay here with us. Ona hesitated, glancing at Ojiji, who was moaning softly, clutching his leg. And then what? She asked, her voice trembling. We keep him there until he can no longer harm us, EJEMBI replied, his eyes cold, his resolve unyielding. Or until the gods decide his fate. With great effort, Ona and Adama moved Ojiji to a small, unused hut behind the main house. It had once been a storage place for yams and other provisions, but now it will serve as Ojiji's abode. The people of the town watched in silence, unsure of what to do, their eyes flickering between Ojiji and EJEMBI. As the days passed, word spread quickly through the village about Ojiji's downfall. Some saw it as just punishment for his years of misbehavior, while others believed it was a curse that would bring misfortune to the entire village. Still, no one dared to interfere. The village elders, though troubled, remained silent. Ojiji's sin had been many, and perhaps this was the justice he deserved. Inside their home, Ona, Adama, and EJEMBI began to adjust to their new reality. It was a strange feeling, this newfound freedom. For years, they had lived under the shadows of Ojiji's misbehavior, but now the shadow had lifted and they could breathe again. Ona, for the first time in many years, began to see a glimmer of hope. She walked around with renewed sense of purpose, her hands steady, her eyes brighter. She began to teach Adama the old songs, the ones she had sung as a girl, songs filled with the stories of love and courage, songs that had been silenced by Ojiji's anger. Adama too began to change. She found solace in her son Ikani, whose innocent laughter filled the house with a joy that had long been absent. She would often sit by the river with him, watching him with the other children, her heart filled with a bittersweet mixture of love and sorrow. She was still haunted by the question that had plagued her since his birth. Is Ikani her son, her brother, or both? She did not have the answer, but she knew she loved him fiercely, protectively. He was hers, no matter how he came to be. EJEMBI, on the other hand, struggled with his newfound role as the man of the house. He always dreamt of the day he will be strong enough to stand up to his father. But now that the day had come, he found himself burdened with a heavy responsibility. The weight of his actions lay heavily on his shoulders. He knew that breaking his father's will was only the beginning. He had crossed the line, one that could not be uncrossed. He could feel the eyes of the town on him, judging, watching, waiting to see what he will do next. One evening, EJEMBI sat by the doorway, his mind lost in thoughts. Ona approached him quietly, her steps light, her face etched with concern. You did what you had to do, she said softly, sitting down beside him. He would have destroyed all of us if you hadn't stopped him. EJEMBI nodded, though he did not feel the comfort in her words. I know, Mama, he replied. But what now, Mama? How do we move forward from here? On her side, her gaze drifted to the horizon. We take it one day at a time, she said. We'll heal, we'll rebuild, and we'll do it all together. But healing was not easy. The scars of the past ran deep, and the wounds were still fresh. Ojiji's presence, even confined to the small hut at the back, was a constant reminder of their pain. He would call out in the night, his voice weak, begging for water or food, for forgiveness. At first, Ona and Adama tended to him, bringing him what little food they could spare. But as the days turned into weeks, their visits became less frequent. Their sympathy for him was waning. One night, as the crickets sang their song and the moon hung high in the sky, Ojiji called out again, his voice trembling. Ona, Adama, please, I'm thirsty. Adama was nursing Ikani. She looked at her mother, her face set with a mixture of pity and resentment. "Let him alone," she said quietly. "He has caused enough pain. Let him feel what it was to be so helpless." Ona hesitated, her maternal instincts warring with her sense of justice. She looked at EJEMBI, who stood by the doorway, his expression unreadable. "What do you think?" she asked him. EJEMBI remained silent for a moment, his mind turning over the possibilities. Finally, he spoke. "We are not like him, you know. We do not let others suffer, but we do not have to forgive him either." Reluctantly, Ona took a small cup of water and went to the hut. Ojiji was lying on the ground, his face pale, his eyes dull. He looked up at her with a pleading expression, his lips cracked and dry. "Please, just a sip," he whispered. Ona knelt beside him and held the cup to his lips. "This does not mean we forgive you," she said, her voice firm. "You will never be forgiven for what you have done to us, to Adama, to your own daughter." Ojiji drank greedily, the water spilling down his chin. When he finished, he looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. "I am sorry," he mumbled. "I am so sorry for everything." Ona stared at him, her heart hardening. She had heard those words before, too many times, and they had always been empty. She stood up and turned away, leaving him alone in the darkness. As she walked back to the house, she felt a sense of closure, a small step towards healing. But healing would not come so easily. The town was divided. Some believed Ojiji should be cast out, sent away to live in the wilderness, where he could no longer harm anyone. Others believed he should be given a chance to repent, to seek forgiveness from his family and the gods. The elders, seeing the discord among other people, called for a meeting to decide Ojiji's fate. The day of the meeting arrived, and the entire town gathered at the market square by the big Iroko tree. The elders, wise and stern, sat in a circle, their faces solemn. EJEMBI stood with his family, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew this day would come, and he was prepared to fight for his family's honor, for their right to live without fear. The oldest elder, Okaka, a man with a voice as deep as the river and eyes that had seen many seasons, rose to speak. "We are here to decide the fate of Ojiji, a man who has brought much suffering to his family and to our village," he began. "We must ask ourselves, can a man so broken ever be made whole again? Can he be forgiven, or should he be cast out?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, while others shook their heads. "Cast him out," shouted a man from the back. "He is a curse upon us." "No," said a woman with tears in her eyes. "He must be given a chance to repent. Everyone deserves a second chance." EJEMBI stepped forward, his heart heavy, but his resolve strong. "My father has done terrible things," he said, his voice clear and unwavering. "He has hurt us, broken us, and left scars that may never heal. But he is my father. I do not ask for your forgiveness for him, but I ask for the right to decide his fate myself, as his son, as the one who has suffered the most at his hands." The crowd fell silent, all eyes on EJEMBI. The elders conferred amongst themselves, their voices low, their faces serious. Finally, Okaka spoke again. "You have spoken wisely, EJEMBI," he said. "The decision shall be yours." The air was thick with tension as the villagers waited for EJEMBI's decision. The entire town seemed to hold its breath, the weight of his choice heavy on everyone's heart. EJEMBI stood still, his mind racing. The faces of his mother, his sister, and his son all flashed before his eyes. He thought of all the pain Ojiji had caused, the years of torment and suffering, and yet he also felt the burden of decision. What was justice? What was mercy? He looked at his mother, Honor, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. He saw his sister, Adama, holding Ikani close, her face unreadable, and in that moment, he knew what he had to do. We will not cast him out, EJEMBI finally said, his voice steady. He will remain here, in that hut, away from the rest of us. He will leave, or he will live alone, with only his guilt and his shame to keep him company. He will have food and water, but nothing more. He will be forced to confront what he has done, to understand the pain he has caused. That is his punishment. A murmur from the crowd rippled through everywhere. Some nodded in agreement, others frowned, but none dared to speak out. The elders, after a moment of deliberation, nodded their approval. So be it, Okaka said solemnly. Ojiji shall remain in the hut, isolated from his family and the rest of the village. He will be provided for, but he will not live among us. This is the punishment decided by his own blood. The decision was made, and slowly the people began to disperse, returning to their homes, their fields, their lives. The whispers continued, but there was a sense of closure in the air, a feeling that justice, in some form, had been served. And so the family moved forward with their scars, but stronger, forever bound by their shared pain, but also by their shared hope. They had faced the worst, and together they will build a new future, a future free from fear, a future filled with the promise of healing and love.